Hi, all of you CI 3000 students. My name is Shannon Fitz, and I teach this course in our program. And I'm going to give a little introduction to the translanguaging classroom text, which we'll be delving into this week. So the translanguaging classroom text was written by Dr. Ofelia Garcia, who is pictured in the middle there, Susana Ibarra Johnson, and Kate Seltzer, also doctors of in education. And all three folks have done a lot of practical research in a variety of classrooms from elementary through high school, and hopefully you'll find that reflected in the text, which includes a lot of classroom examples. So in the preface and the first two chapters, we're really just going to be delving into the theoretical concept of what translanguaging is, theoretical and practical concepts of what translanguaging is, what does it look like, what does it mean to think about language more as something that we do, that we participate in, and less as like static objects that are out there and never changeable. So you'll maybe be introduced to some new language in these first couple of chapters. The authors talk about thinking about language as a repertoire. And when you think about your own language, think about what kinds of different tools might you use to get your points across. So, for an example, when you're texting to somebody, you might use words alongside emojis to make your point more clear. And that's somewhat similar to this idea of translanguaging, that we have a variety of tools available to us that we can employ to make our communication more effective, or to reach specific goals, like if we want to be funny or something like that. So in the first chapter, they discuss how translanguaging, we can think about it in terms of, like I was just saying, like how we as people use language, and specifically for multilingual folks, how folks who are multilingual can use more than one language while they're communicating. And that could be verbally, in writing, or in multimodal text, such as, graphic novels, or like I was just mentioning, like texting and things. We can also, as teachers, think about translanguaging as a pedagogical approach, where we specifically think about how are we going to use more than one language in our teaching to improve our student learning in our classrooms. In the first chapter, the authors introduced 3 teachers who we will be following and revisiting throughout the text. One thing that you'll notice is that they're going to be coming back to these teachers over and over again throughout the text. So you might find it helpful to make some notes on what each teacher's teaching environment is, what they're up to, just to kind of keep it straight in your mind. And one thing, I know we're all preparing to be elementary school teachers. One thing to keep in mind as we look at the examples provided for Justin and Stephanie is more to focus on what they're doing, and not like, oh, well, this is with an age group that I'm not going to be working with. So think about, well, how does what they're doing apply to, or could apply to, younger groups of students? The other thing that they introduce in the first chapter, and that will be explored throughout the text, are these purposes of translanguaging. And I really want you to try to start to wrap your mind around, well, what do these mean? How are they distinct from one another? How do they support one another? And what do they look like in practice? So again, as you're reading through the text and also looking at the videos that we're going to look at for this week, I want you to take some notes on what these different purposes, how you understand them, what they mean for you, and what examples that you can find. And that will help you understand these concepts better. In chapter 2, the authors go a little bit more into what the translanguaging classroom framework looks like, and they discuss this idea of the translanguaging corriente. The idea of corriente is shown here. It's like a current or a flowing river, flowing water. And the idea of the translanguage corriente is that, like in your classroom, that you have kids who are multilingual. Those multilingual capacities are always going to be there, whether they're above the surface or flowing under the surface. And as teachers, we can pay attention to that and sort of tap into that. So they talk about the corriente kind of interacting with the student and the teacher to influence our lesson design, influence our teaching choices, and also influence what's up with the students, what the students are doing. The authors come up with their own way of representing this idea, and you might find it beneficial to think through some of the concepts in chapter 2 and think about, well, how would I represent some of these concepts visually? Sometimes it's really beneficial to represent information provided textually in visual manners so to help you remember better. And that's also a skill that we can teach to our students. Again, in chapter 2, they sort of go through and introduce these 3 components of the classroom that they'll then provide examples of throughout the text. The teacher, we have to have our own stance, lesson design, and ability to shift our focus to respond to our students in a translanguaging classroom. The students, paying attention to how they use language, and then that corriente, like the shifting and movement and presence of translanguaging in your classroom, whether you recognize it or whether you don't recognize it. So I hope that this short introduction helps you dive into the first couple of chapters of the text, and I look forward to hearing what you found interesting as well as your questions.